Up next, we have an interview with the Dead Air Fresheners. No strangers to this program, or really radio in the Northwest, if you happen to host anything with a slightly experimental edge to it. But yeah, here they are via Zoom, and to help protect their anonymity, as is often their wont, it was requested that in place of the actual video that was accompanying this call, that instead we put samples of their 5:15 Friday happy hour performances, so you can get a sense of what it actually looks like to see them perform when they do this. There's a lot that could be said, I think, about their history, who they are, where they've been, whatnot. I think the relevant highlights is that for a band that's been around for almost 30 years, they've sort of kind of grown into their current incarnation. But on the whole, they have continued to maintain a sort of a style, a form, a signature that is really unique and continues to persist, even as they recruit new members who are actually the children of old members. And so, yeah, it seems as if the Dead Air Fresheners are kind of on this generational journey through exploring sound, finding things that happen in the moment, finding things that happen in the studio, and finding things that happen on stage, and mixing and matching them in different ways to create what they do. That's probably all I really need to say, but do visit the website where you can find all of their recordings and whatnot. Kill Pop Tarts, recordings.bandcamp.com, your resource for the Dead Air Fresheners. And why don't we just get into the chat now? You know, we have a very a special treat today here on the program, because we have, I mean, and usually this is kind of a hard get considering the anonymity, but we have the Dead Air Fresheners here on the show. How's it going?
Good.
I don't know how
Good.
Without kind of like peeking too far behind the curtain, the Dead Air Fresheners have been located in different parts of the Northwest, as well as had different members from different parts of the Northwest.
And still do. I mean, we have active membership from Bellingham to Salem.
Right. Yeah. So it's one of those things.
But active doesn't. The people in those towns are doing stuff with us all the time. It just means that that those are people we do stuff with. Right. For people who maybe are unfamiliar with the Dead Air Fresheners and have not really experienced you guys much before, this might be a good time to kind of dig in a tiny bit into the history, because as I hinted at earlier, you guys are in your 26th year. So this isn't like you were a band that was going for a couple years and then the pandemic hit and then you just put out all these pandemic albums. It's like there's a little bit of history here going on, and it goes back well into the 90s. So I guess here's a good way to phrase this. When people are asking about booking the Dead Air Fresheners and they're like, hey, can I get like a little capsule summary? How often do you guys tell the truth, or do you guys just make that up every time? It's pretty much always the truth. I mean, there's not any reason to make anything up. In general, we've become a lot more lax about worrying about hiding identity than we used to be.
Weird.
Don't worry, your secret's safe with us.
The guy who's credited constantly as a producer and a director and so forth.
And you have had people who are better known in terms of collaborators, like Chuck Swaim and Bob Bucko Jr. and whatnot. People who it feels appropriate to name check them.
Somebody's doing their own thing that is very clearly their own thing in our collaboration. I just set up this thing that we did with Noise Poet Nobody.
Right.
Totally. As a Noise Poet Nobody and Dead Air Fresheners album, it's not just the Dead Air Fresheners. If you listen to it, it wouldn't sound right. It wouldn't sound just us with our name on it. It definitely is both. And in all those cases, I think that's the case. I mean, usually it's been a spoken word artist that we would have, Chuck Swaim with the Dead Air Fresheners, Jennifer Robin with the Dead Air Fresheners, Austin Rich with the Dead Air Fresheners.
Oh, right. I did that.
Those, we used to do it mostly with spoken word, but then, with Bob Bucko Jr., it's like he approached us with an album that he wanted to put out on Kill Pop Tarts. And I said, hey, I have some ideas for some of these tracks. What do you think about this, this, and that? And before you know it, it ended up being an album of duets between Dead Air Fresheners with Bob Bucko Jr., and right. I think the fact that it is more interesting than if we claimed it were just us, even, besides the fact that the songwriting is all driven by him and everything that we did was in response to something that he did. But I think that, it's the collaboration is in and of itself sometimes a really interesting and exciting thing, and right. We celebrate that when it's the case,
which I think is nice because there's a cohesive flavor across the discography. Like, it's not like you listen to the early work and you're like, oh wow, those early albums were great, but man, they suck. It's like you have a Dead Air Fresheners flavor all throughout.
Good to hear. It'll be interesting when Unfriended comes out to see if that still seems that way. I think it will.
Sure. Well, I think this is the thing about new albums too, though, is that it is an opportunity to not only for reinvention but for continuing the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
The Dead Air Fresheners have done a lot of radio collaborations over the years, all over the place, really. When you guys are doing radio, because obviously part of the story of the Dead Air Fresheners is this kind of like, let's kind of hide the difference between performer and audience and kind of like try to approach it in an almost anonymous way. Radio has a very anonymizing effect. Do you guys find that you can do something a little bit different because the radio is already bringing half of the show in certain ways?
I don't know. I mean, every time we have played on the radio, we've played masked, because it's just important to us to actually feel like the Dead Air Fresheners when we're doing it.
Right. All the photographs of all of the radio studios. Yeah, you guys are never just kind of like walking around like, oh, home, it's us. It's like, you guys are just as dedicated each time.
Yeah.
I play the same no matter where I'm doing it and whether I've got a mask on or anything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is really just chasing them moment from moment, through expression or dynamics or, just whatever is going to happen between the other members who are playing, and listening to them and trying to be like peanut butter between them sometimes, or air, or whatever it is. It isn't a form of improvisation, but with knowledge, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, because contrast as well as collaboration or trying to be in harmony as well as harmonious there's just as many decisions to make within all of those ranges, and so it's like, I mean, I can totally imagine a scenario where the performance actually kind of like begins several days before the audience is seeing you, because like there are so many choices that are being made leading up to the performance that will influence what happens on that day.
I would say that I have options. I've got my options. You can label them in your mind if you wanted to. A circle, I got a square, and I got a triangle, and that someplace, I've got those elements in my mind, and I'll get to one after the other, some way morphing in between.
Right. Kind of finding the way between these decisions that you have to make. Yeah.
Yeah. Or you can think of it as turning on like a garden hose, and once you turn it on, you've got to play the garden hose until you turn it off. So you can kink the hose, you can spray things down, you can make a sprinkler out of it, but that kind of keeps me focused. That keeps me kind of on the balance beam, so to speak. until you jump off the balance beam.
Right. I like that. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, and
that's how I play.
And to answer your original question from my perspective, I guess what I started to say about the wearing we've always worn masks on the radio is kind of, it's the opposite of what you said. Rather than doing anything special on the radio, I think it's really important to us to make it the same as if we're not on the radio.
I see.
Which is what I think I've always unconsciously tried to do is that if I think that, and maybe that's because, now when we play, we usually tend to be, guitars and drums and things that people look at and think, oh, rock band kind of thing. But in previous years where it was a lot of electronics and some weird homemade instruments and a lot of horns and stuff, I think the performances, the mask would help us to have a band appearance, a feeling of unity and sort of something we're doing that maybe you get automatically a little bit more with the standard rock gear. And so on the radio is the same thing, since we didn't have, all the equipment to kind of hide behind. We'd hide behind the masks and allow them to kind of create that feeling of, we are this thing that's happening, which I think is the feeling we try to create at any of our shows.
Right. And it's like an event.
I think most bands are kind of that, but we're just, hyper aware of that as maybe kind of the main thing is just creating an experience.
Yeah, there is a theatrical kind of performance kind of quality to it as well, where it's like, we are putting on a show. We are trying to engage in some way or another that's like, almost like bards in the Shakespearean sense. And so part of this is that we're going to put on a costume and we're going to do this, and it's going to be a little bit different, and you got to go with this on it,
Yeah, no, I'm really big on the fact that I want people to listen to recordings at home. I make recordings for them to listen at home, but if they're at a show, that's not what this is.
Yeah.
I mean, they could just stay home and listen to the recording then. I mean, I'm trying to give them something they can't get at home. I mean, that's the whole point. But, lately we've had to retool that because there've been so few shows that it's like we're at home trying to give them people something they can't get at home.
Right.
I like having costumes. It's easier to decide what to wear.
Yeah.
And it's just done. You have to decide. And focus on loading the instruments or something.
Right. It gives you more time to actually work.
Back to what we're talking about with playing on the radio as opposed to live. The Dead Air Fresheners really aren't like a plug it into the board and go direct type of band. Pretty much every instrument here is either it's electric, it's coming out of an amplifier, or if it's an acoustic instrument, it's just acoustic.
In the air.
Yeah. So the Dead Air Fresheners really are pretty much a live band.
Right. Even on recordings, in a lot of ways, it's often just
even in the studio. What I'm saying. Yeah.
I failed to mention this, although I hope it's apparent now. Yeah, we say albums and studio and whatnot, but in a lot of ways these are just treated live performances that get to put on a disc.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean. But extremely treated.
Certainly, this is kind of a harder subject to bridge, but what it has been fascinating about kind of the entire history of Dead Air Fresheners is, unfortunately, the band has experienced some loss. People have passed, but there's also been newer, younger additions that have come into the band that are kind of adding to it in different ways. And in this way, it almost kind of feels like family, where, so for some bands, when people pass, you just find a new drummer or what have you. But I mean, like that's not how it works in this group. It's really about kind of like finding a new way to express yourself when someone leaves.
Mm-hmm. No, you're completely right. I mean, it's like when my wife Deanne passed on, she ended up leaving us with her guitars, which I ended up really kind of bonding with, and that's, you know, a major driver in our sound since then. And I had already been playing those guitars quite a bit in the group, but it's a little different when, you know, I'm really playing her guitars as a way to play music with her. It's the only way I can now. So it definitely changes the whole experience. And we started covering, you know, one of her songs, Ghost Cracked Glass, and playing samples of her playing it and then playing with those, and as a way to actually play with her in the group. And it's been really powerful. And more recently, we lost Ryan's brother Roger, who was the original Dead Air Freshener with me, actually, as far as recordings go. The track that's on our recent album on Kill Pop Tarts, the Last Asteroid, there's a track called That Happened When I Wasn't in the Room. And that is the very first Dead Air Fresheners recording, which was all Roger and me playing the Moog that's been on, you know, almost all Dead Air Fresheners albums and shows,
right?
Which was his, that he loaned to me, and then I never give it back, and then he eventually gifted it to me. I did finally one time say, I got to give this back to you. He's like, no, I can't take it now. I was like, oh. He actually scored that for $5. But anyway, we took turns with a old Casio sampler, little chip sampler. These things were awesome in the end of the 90s. They were around, but they were crappy at the same time because they just died really fast. But he had one of those, maybe I had one of those, and we had the Moog, and we took turns with each of us playing one, and then we took the tracks and combined them all together, switching the two instruments around, and that ended up being the very first Dead Air Fresheners piece, and kind of the blueprint for what we really did and have sounded like for years after that, which was this really keyboard-driven, drone-y stuff. And, you know, now we continue to have that as a huge element in what we do, and it's all atmospherics and so forth still. You know, it's just now with the guitars, maybe it becomes drone rock some of the time. But and Roger, I never played in the Dead Air Fresheners with him again. He and Ryan were together in the Blue Faces for a number of years, and did some really great albums, some of which we put out on Kill Pop Tarts now too. But
Roger's album is done now.
Yeah, we're putting out an album of his solo material. In the very near future too. Yeah, on Bandcamp on the Kill Pop Tart site. But anyway, you know, he really crossed into all the categories because he was a band member. He was a fan and friend. I mean, he literally, like, every time we played one of those 5:15 happy hours, he was always there, like just watching. You could see him on there on the screen, and you know, commenting and cracking up, and you know, showing that he was totally into it the whole time. And his family. So you got, you know, the family, the fan, and the band member. I mean, it just checked all the boxes, hardcore, and so it was a hard hit when he passed on. But yeah, I mean, that's all we can do as artists is to celebrate the art, and you know, Ryan's going through and finding all the Blue Faces stuff and Roger's solo stuff that we can, and we'll put it out on Kill Pop Tarts and let people hear it, and let the art carry on.
We've kind of covered a fair amount of ground here. I'm also trying a little bit not to repeat myself too many times because we've had you on the show before. But I guess if I listen to kind of older Dead Air Fresheners recordings, I wonder about that band, did that band think that they were going to be doing this for 26 years? Like, there's something about it where every Dead Air Fresheners recording kind of feels in the moment. And therefore, they don't seem like they're anticipating a future. But there's something about it where, like, it really works when you reiterate it over and over the years.
Yeah. Aside from, you know, the fear of the planet ceasing to exist and global annihilation, you know, I think I've always expected to be doing it sort of forever. Initially, I mean, there's a sample that we use a fair amount of Elvis Presley, and he's saying, in fact, I'm aware of what I'm doing at all times. And I love that sample because it's like, you know, it's such complete and utter BS, but then it's so true too. You know, and when he said it, it was the biggest truth he could have said for a guy who's a Capricorn, who, you know, reached that level of stardom, and you know, I'm sure it was so true on a certain level. A helicopter flying over. I shouldn't talk about Elvis to get in trouble.
Get out of here! Leave us alone!
I love Elvis, really.
They're gonna spray us with that moss spray.
Yeah. And peanut butter and pickles. But anyway, you know, that's the thing. I mean, on the other hand, he was a complete wreck, and I'm sure was at that point already too, and had no idea where he was going, or that, you know, and that's kind of the deal with the Dead Air Fresheners too. I mean, in the earliest days, what I said I wanted to be doing was I wanted to have a show that was so exciting that people would come check us out, and we'd get to be well known while making this experimental music that eventually could be used for soundtracks and movies, so people would pay me to make it. And that's still the plan. And it's like we're about a third of the way there.
Right. You know, there was no timeline.
I'm not going to say half, because, you know, if I said halfway there, you'd think of Bon Jovi and you'd get mad at me. But we're about a third of the way there.
Right. I like the idea that there isn't a timeline, though. That this, like, you truly are, like, you know, no, this is the goal. We're working on it.
It absolutely. You know, I would eventually like, you know, to be making soundtracks for movies that people want a Dead Air Freshener soundtrack, and they'll pay for it. And in any case, you know, you had mentioned earlier about you know, the family member aspect of the group, and it's true. I mean, I in general, I tend to like to, you know, get in relationships with crazy artist women, and so often they're also musicians, and then you want to do music with them, and then you have kids, and, you know, and so I have, you know, children that are growing up inside the Dead Air Fresheners, and that has created kind of the plan B, that if the soundtrack thing doesn't work out, if I haven't achieved that by the time I'm gone, that they can just carry on with it.
I love it. The generational band. It just keeps going.
Yeah. You're curious and want to see more, than go on YouTube, though, and hours and hours. You could spend several days just experiencing the Dead Air Fresheners at this point.
Yeah. Are all of those 515 happy hours up there?
No, not yet. There's only a select few of the favorites of those that are up there. And I mean, I recommend those because they were such a fun. I mean, I didn't always get to catch them live, but, like, you know, these videos would stay up, and it was such a fun way to kind of, like, you know, check in every week and have this kind of, like, it was almost kind of like well, we're all. It's time for the Dead Air Freshener show, guys. Let's keep up. What's happened this week?
Yeah, no, that kept me kind of thinking about things, what I was going to do this week, and how to change it up, or find something that I was messing around with that I could do the next week.
Yeah, there was an online publication. I forget what they were called, but they referred to us as, you know, the Experimental Music Partridge Family, and that was cool.
Oh, that is good.
Because we had a weekly show with
maybe
kids.
Reuben Kincaid or something.
Yeah. It's like between that and the monthly audio waffles that were happening out of Sacramento, it really felt like there was this TV component to experimental music that was happening. And I think the pandemic really brought that home in a way that it wasn't quite happening before. So yeah, it has been a little while since we actually last spoke, and quite a bit has happened. But I think where we kind of left things is that we had been talking about the lead up to and then the aftermath of the release of Tape Hiss' The Blowjob of Lo-Fi.
Right. And that's amazing because we had just released it when we were on your show and we talked a bit about it, and then it blew up and we didn't even know, because it that August it was reviewed in The Wire, and I noticed that it was strange that when I checked like what was most played on the Kill Pop Tart site, that the 33-minute track on that album was just pivoting up. But I thought maybe it was a glitch and wasn't true. and then later, our newest album, Tales from the Elusive Hangar, got reviewed in The Wire, and Emily Pothast, I'm not sure how to say her name. It's funny how you see these people's name in writing for years and years of your life, and then you say them out loud and you say, do I even know how to pronounce that? In any case, great writer, and I've known her for years, first as a musician who I played on my radio show a lot, and she was handed a review to do of that album, and did so, and then did what anybody would do and told me. And then also, that's how I found out that the Tape Hiss had been reviewed months before.
Got it.
So having been, doing experimental music and reading about it in The Wire for some 30 years, and really the only project that I've ever done that's gotten any notice in The Wire at all has been the Olympia Experimental Music Festival. I mean, how do you not notice something that goes on for 25 years and brings all those people together? But that wasn't about
legacy too. It's people who have played that have gone on to do incredible things.
Right, and it was certainly a place where people were brought together to sometimes new groups arose out of it and everything. But that's the only thing that really I've ever done that's gotten any mention in The Wire, and no radio show, no band, nothing. And so she proceeded to kind of, in her review, also talk about my radio show, which was nice, and I got the full circle of it, all that stuff kind of exposed where it belongs.
Right. And this is kind of a nice full circle too, because you've been playing stuff. If I'm not mistaken, don't they put out compilations through the Wire fairly regularly of music and art that's kind of up and coming?
Yeah, the Wire Capper thing.
And I feel like I've heard you play those on your show for years.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's certainly been a place where I've learned about new types of music for sure.
Yeah.
I'm not too cool to play a compilation that somebody put together as my first experience with somebody, and then find out more about it, with everyone else.
For sure.
What's the small thing is a lot of stuff's new to me first go around too.
Yeah.
As is the case with your show, I know.
Right. Well, and I was just getting to that. I suspect that our shows become places where we're trying out things for ourselves as much as for the listeners. We have a pretty good sense that this is going to work or this is going to fit, but I'm sometimes rolling the dice.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to me looking back after years at like what artists have influenced me, and it's a lot more obvious to me now than maybe at other times. And just, for instance, all those years of being in the radio station and having Jan Deck records around, it's like I realize now that the aesthetic influenced me as much as the sound, and the both did really strongly. And the idea of these blurry photos and everything, I think that's been a huge influence on the presentation of the Dead Air Fresheners.
You're getting into something that I think, especially if you take a look at the Dead Air Fresheners over time, the visual record on the albums and whatnot, it is, like we get one view when we're looking at any one particular album, but there is a almost kind of like visual aesthetic that you have cultivated over time that is not necessarily obvious from one album or from one performance.
Right. It's not as obvious as Jandek albums. I mean,
he has a much more uniform kind of.
Right. I mean, you can count on his records to have that Corwood look. Well, with us, for instance, the Tales from the Elusive Hangar, we had a local artist. Let me get his name correctly that I requested and hired to do the cover.
And this is the I think you guys were advertising it as the first release of 2023.
Yeah. We put it out on Kill Pop Tarts right at midnight on New Year's Eve, and
smart.
And and part of the reason I'm sitting on my porch again, like here, letting dogs bark in the background and crows and some cars and all these sounds, is that's really what that album was kind of all about. And Christopher Michael McMurray, a St. John's, Portland artist, and his art is so cool. And he's an African-American artist who has definitely some graffiti influence, as well as surrealism and classic art and tribal art, and through all that, his art is very subtle and isn't very overblown. And so I asked him if he'd do the cover for the album, and he listened to it. And I didn't ask him to do a crow on the cover. That was his own decision. That just kind of what he got out of listening to the album, that he thought captured it. And there are two songs that make note of crows on the album, so it makes perfect sense. And
and it also, I mean, like, this might not have been on purpose, but it does fit the same kind of visual aesthetic that you have on other albums, even though it's a different artist coming in to do the design. And
we brought in different artists that I just really liked what they did and thought that'd be a great Dead Air Fresheners album cover in the past too.
I think that one of the interesting things about, I mean, just in terms of trying to think of the larger scope of the Dead Air Fresheners, is that, like, over time there have been like these subtle changes and whatnot, and obviously you're approaching each project differently. But I think that you now actually have a reputation that perhaps you didn't have in the earlier years, and that's allowing people to kind of see you in a different light than perhaps the first half of the Dead Air Freshener story allowed. Because I feel like the recognition in print, being able to do more collaborations, definitely even kind of releasing more recordings and whatnot. This is all kind of like a more mature Dead Air Fresheners, a band that's kind of like, seen a few things here and there, and people are starting to realize, like, oh yeah, that, it's like, it's no longer just a funny name on a flyer. It's like, oh yeah, we know them.
Well, we have some of the youngest musicians out there playing and making experimental music in the group, but we also have a lot of old people. Yeah,
splitting the difference.
I think that, and I think that with that in mind, I mean, myself personally, I've really become clear on what my mission is, and I was talking about to Jennifer about this, and we agreed. We're just at this point in our lives as artists where you start feeling a little bit of mortality, and the art is sort of the only little bit of immortality you have, and you just want to have a really good body of work. And so that's been my desire, is just, and which is why in a year when, thank you to you guys over at WFMU for playing Unfriended enough that it was in your most played of the year list at the end of the year. I mean, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And then the reviews in the Wire, and then the review and a closer listen of sea shanties, and the review of The Last Asteroid and Jack Rabbit's zine, and there's been just so much recognition finally, and yeah, I mean it's a great thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think especially in this day and age, like there isn't really a wrong way to release an album. I think the album still needs to speak for itself, and like that's something that Dead Air Fresheners definitely care about when they are putting together a record. You're not necessarily just kind of grabbing the most recent batch of recordings and going like, well, here's another one we can slice off the log, yeah, certainly we kind of talked about this being a little bit short anyway, because I only
Absolutely. I've talked way more than I thought I would. So.